Hey guys, welcome back to the channel designed to help you catch more and bigger fish, in-depth angling. In today's video, we are breaking down the spring white bass patterns, movements, baits, and locations on Stockton Lake, located in the Missouri Ozarks. Be sure to stay with us until the end of the video as we reveal some white bass fishing spots to go catch yourself a big one this spring. If you are new to the channel, fish Stockton Lake, or want to learn more about white bass fishing, consider subscribing to the channel so you catch the next lake breakdown or fishing adventure on Stockton Lake. Alright guys, let's dive into this. In the early spring, white bass start moving out of their deep winter haunts in the old river channels in the lower and mid sections of the lake and start running up the river arms to the southern sections of Stockton Lake, closer towards where the river inlets are. An example of a wintering location for white bass would be these old river channels next to these bluffs and the mouths of these creek channels out here that are running in between 50 to 60 foot of water during the early spring. As things start to get relatively warmer, these areas up here are going to be more and more loaded with white bass traveling up these channels towards the rivers. The white bass move to the relatively warmer waters where shad, their main food source, stacks up in large schools to feed aggressively before making a spawning run up into the Sac and Little Sac rivers. Here would be an example of an area where I would find some of these fish that are staging up before they go into their spawning run. This is a good pre-spawn area here. You have on the upper part of your screen here in this blue area a good sized flat that sticks out here with some mid depths kind of running all along it out here. You're looking at 15, 17 foot. Comes up here to a hump that's on it towards 7 foot in depth, but it drops right back off into the old river channel again. That's going to be a great area for those fish to be moving up as they're making the run towards the rivers, and a good area for them to pull off and feed on some shad along the way. This would be a really good area, especially if you get some wind moving through there to go and target those white bass. This isn't the only area you could find them in though. This is over here on the Big Sac arm of Stockton Lake. There is Suns Creek over here as well, which is almost like another river arm that shoots off of it. The white bass will travel up this as well. They'll stop along some of these different flats out and through here, like as indicated by this blue shaded area, and feed as they're moving their way through this deeper channel on their way up towards the inlet over here. And this gets more and more shallow as you go further up towards the rivers and the creeks on Stockton. But that is ultimately where all these white bass are going to end up. And the same pattern can be followed over here near Aldrich and the Little Sac arm of Stockton Lake as well. And this area over here is really good. It has a big white bass spawning run and good areas out here in the channel with a lot of mid-depth range and flats and points and different kinds of areas where those fish are still in stable enough water, because we are getting quite a bit of some colder temperatures still in the early spring, but they feel comfortable there. The shad stay in there. It really becomes a good hot bite once you can find the fish. Water temperatures affect the timing of the white bass pre-spawn staging and their run into the rivers. Look for them to be chasing shad schools and packs over deep to mid-depth flats outside of river channels, and in the river channels leading up to the mouth of the rivers in the late February to mid-March, once water temperatures are between 45 and 55 degrees. Some more examples of some flats that these white bass will use during this time to stage up for the pre-spawn is going to be right out here on the outside of this old river channel. You guys can kind of see there's a bluff wall that's over here indicated by how tight these contour lines are. It's a sheer cliff right there. And that channel actually takes a hard bend out here and kind of cuts diagonally through the middle. And there's a big flat area just off that is only maybe about a 10 to 8 foot depth change, but that's enough of a break for those fish to pull off and go feed there. This whole area out here is good area for staging walleye and white bass during the pre-spawn runs as they're getting their way up here towards the rivers. And this can be followed all the way up here. Even you don't have to be all the way down here necessarily to go find that. As they get closer and closer, there still is an old channel here that they will run in, and a lot of times they'll be chasing bait fish out through here and kind of hanging out right next to this slow tapering shoreline that comes into it. The important for you guys to remember and know about this is that the river channels act like a highway for these white bass on their journey up towards the rivers to go make their spawning run, and these different offshoot flats and points that come off into the lake that are extended out act as like a feeding table for them as they're making that journey. White bass don't tend to relate to cover as much as other species like crappie do. White bass will relate to areas with shad and move with them, either to suspend and feed on them or rest right on or just off of the bottom. Though you will occasionally find them near windblown shoreline, they are often on the move in the main channel targeting the open waters. It can be a challenge for anglers to find the schools of fish. I highly recommend having a boat with electronics to help you locate fish, as there is little to no telling where in the water column they will set up without them. If you plan on fishing from shore, windy shoreline concentrates the shad and the white bass will follow them. For example, if we have a southern wind coming in here next to this boat ramp area here and wind's getting pushed up into this cove, I would expect to find some white bass sitting up here towards the back of this cove, getting ready to funnel in some of those shad from the channel here and get to a feeding frenzy in this pocket. Things like that'll happen, but it's not always super reliable and it's a hit and miss bite. Bottleneck areas where the channel meets a pinch point can be a good place to start, as the fish get concentrated in a smaller area as they move up the river channel to go and spawn. This is an area right over here next to the public boat ramp area by Aldrich. There's a bridge right here and a good pinch point where this jetty comes out where this bridge is created, and it funnels those fish, so anything that's moving in or out of that river has got to come through that little pinch point area there. It's also a good area for those fish to really funnel their bait and almost kind of trap them against these walls of this jetty and make an area that's easier for them to feed in. So this is a good area to go and try for bank fishing all through this more shallow and skinnier channel out here as well. A little bit of an easier area to find them with trolling or going and trying to cast around. I've seen a lot of people be around through this area out here and having some good success doing that over the years. Another jetty area out here where there's an old bridge that comes through over here near Suns Creek, and there's another boat ramp there as well, so you guys can fish right there from shore and be able to access some good white bass fishing there as they're moving their way up that creek as well. And the same thing's happening over here on the big sack arm. There's two jetties that come out. Both those places are good areas to find white bass moving through. There's a deeper channel that runs out through here, and plenty of fish are coming up through that channel to go up into the river to spawn, not just white bass but walleye and anything else that's really following those shad up the river as well. Fish can be caught on small jigs such as these little Mr. Twister jigs right here. These are great all around for fishing either the deep channels or casting from shore. They're pretty inexpensive, so it's not a problem to really lose a couple of them to some snags. Usually you're fishing around some rocky areas for these fish if you're going from shore, and it's a pretty economic way to go and target these white bass. Another thing you can use is live baits, or you can use some swim baits like this Kitech here. These are really good. I've used them for the last couple of years and had really great success with them with the kicking tail. You can run these right next to the bottom. You can run them when those fish are suspended up and feeding on shad in the middle of the water column. They work great. Another one that you can use here is the Alabama rig. Different versions of this are good as well. You can only have a few hooks on yours in Missouri, but these things absolutely catch really good numbers of white bass and big ones too. As they're going around and feeding on those schools of shad, this acts as like a little bait ball that they could key in on with plenty of different attractants to them. They can't really miss this thing as it's going through the water. If those fish are suspended or just in a somewhat shallower area and they're looking up to feed and come up to suspend and feed on some of those shad cruising by, these provoke jerk baits here by 6 cents work good. Any other kind of jerk bait, as long as it suspends really well and mimic shad, are going to work most of the time. But I've had really good luck with these personally on Stockton Lake. They produce some really nice size 18 to 19 inch white bass out of that lake. Spoons are another great option for when the fish are a little bit deeper and maybe a little bit suspended off the bottom. You can run these things and it just acts like a really big gizzard shad that's fluttering down there. 6 cents Divine flutter spoons to attract some of those. They have lots of flash, lots of vibration with them. So use something that is close to the size of the shad that you're seeing. If you're seeing shad that are around 4 inches long, use something bigger like this. If you're seeing just a bunch of really small shad around that are maybe in the 2 to 3 inch range, downsize accordingly. We're ultimately just trying to match the hatch with our size of this stuff. I don't think that colors matter a whole lot as long as they're close to what shad resemble. For any of these baits, I just like using white and silver primarily, and if you throw some chartreuse on there for the stained water that we sometimes get during this time of year to make it stand out some, that's fine too. But really getting your size of the bait to match the size of the shad is going to be your biggest thing when it comes to bait selection, to trying to match the hatch. Moving further into spring, the water continues to warm and the white bass begin their spawning run around the 55 to 65 degree water temperatures. The peak of their spawning run usually happens around a full moon in April, but it is important to know they don't all spawn at the exact same time. Some fish will be done spawning while others are just starting to move upriver from the pre-spawn phase. This is a really popular area for anglers to go hit right over here by Turnback Creek. It's named that because most people turn back right there. They don't go further up the river in a boat a lot of times, but if you have a kayak or something like that or a drown boat, you can sometimes get up through here okay. You just got to be kind of careful with getting a motorboat through here if you're going to go try anything with that. But this is a really good area that those white bass are both going in and out of live as they're coming up into the rivers, and obviously they're going to keep coming up along these channels, and following those channels through here, they'll stack up in some of the deeper pools and the deeper runs in this river. A lot of people will be fishing around the bridge areas here. They'll be walking up and down the bank shores and be doing some really good shore fishing as well during that time. And it happens over here on both ends of this split right here. The river goes up in two directions, and it also is a pattern you can follow over here on the little sack arm as well. This is a area right here where there's a clear old river channel and a lot of really shallow islands and stuff like that. If you can find the old river channel, focus on finding those fish that are moving up through here, and once you find a school, start casting at them with those different baits. I like throwing those Kitech swim baits or those little twister tail grubs down there to depth for them when they're in those deeper pools. It helps get to them and get down a little bit further to where you're able to catch them as they're in that early stage of them actually making their run. The spawning run usually lasts 2 to 3 weeks around a full moon. The white bass are aggressive and easy to catch once they are in the rivers, and they stack up in pools below the shallow riffles. Once you find a really shallow, narrow spot where there's some fast moving water there, they'll usually stack up in the first deep hole right below that, and those are good areas to start looking for them if you're going from the bank or in a kayak up those river arms to go find them. Bank fishing really shines during the white bass run, as the fish are in relatively small sections of water you can cast to from a river shore. Rooster tail, inline spinners, crappie jigs, rattle baits, small crankbaits, jerk baits, swim baits, anything that really resembles shad colors or flash to it will work well for the spawning run bite. Don't be afraid to work your bait a little bit faster than you normally would, and be erratic with your movements and your retrieve while working your bait. White bass like to chase prey quite often, and there'll be some still in this area out here in the pre-spawn phase, even while there's a good majority of them up here in the river. So depending on whether you're in a boat or if you're wanting to do bank fishing, you can do both at the same time, and you can catch them in 2 different ways. Once the white bass have completed their spawning cycle, they'll go into what we call a post-spawn phase, while white bass leave the rivers and they begin the journey back to the same areas they used in the upper river arms of Stockton Lake when they were in the pre-spawn phase. So they're going to basically do a reverse of what they did here when they were moving up this direction, and they're going to be coming back down and go right back through these same pinch points, right through these same channels they came back up in, just going the other direction. And as they're heading back out this way, they'll be feeding on shad to recoup after the spawn. They're fairly easy to catch still and a lot of fun. And they really are still fairly aggressive as the water temperatures reach the upper 60s. They follow the old river channels back to the main lake, chasing schools of shad over flats and channels as they did during the pre-spawn. They do the same during the post-spawn phase. They can be caught using the same baits that you can catch them during the spawning run. Some areas to begin searching for post-spawn white bass are the river channel breaks, flats, points, and the mouths of creek coves that have shad schooled up, and they are very much so going to be stacked up in areas where there are channel swings, such as this old bluff area right here. You can see where the old river channel bends right up against the shoreline right through here. Those are good areas to start looking for them when they're in a deeper area. Sometimes shad will pop up and be in these little cuts like this, where you can get into a good feeding frenzy when that's going on there as well. And really finding those fish with those electronics, again, this time of year is going to be really, really helpful for you. The other thing you can do if you're not very much into the technology side of this is you can just go out and start trolling, and eventually you're going to find some moving through this area because you are in a relatively shallower area of the lake up here where the channels are much narrower. If you can tell on this map here, the area down here by the river arms is much narrower compared to the main channel down here towards the lower end of Stockton Lake by the dam, where these fish are going to be moving back towards. So if you're going through here and you're trolling these areas, you will find active fish eventually, and you'll be able to catch them with crankbaits. The other benefit to trolling is you can cover a very large area of water while effectively searching for feeding white bass. Just keep an eye out for surface feeding in the morning and evenings as well. White bass trap schools of shad on the surface. They are fun to catch with topwater lures, and they can be a really, really aggressive short window of time right there where it can be a fish almost on every single cast. They'll do that in places right next to points, or places that they will trap shad up close to these bluff walls. Just keep an eye on any kind of surface activity that you're finding. And it usually happens during those low light conditions during the early morning or late evening around sunrise and sunset. One of my favorite topwater lures for both largemouth and white bass is this Rebel Pop-R. You can work it pretty erratically for the white bass on top of the water, act like it's a fleeing bait fish get away from them, and you can pause it right there too. They'll a lot of times kill it right on the pause or right as soon as you're bringing away from the school of where the activity is. They think that one's getting away, they'll turn on it and grab it real quick. Other thing that they'll like to do and attack are some of these fluke style of baits, where like this is a Z-Man, you can use one by Zoom, the Super Fluke Junior, or something that's in like a smaller shad style. What I like that they're out there in like a white color, and I will work that thing pretty erratically just under the surface, and it looks like a little shad fleeing away from the feeding frenzy that's going on out there, and they'll come up and crush it. As the post spawn continues, these fish get further and further down the lake, back towards the mid-lake areas out here. The channel gets wider and wider, and it gets deeper and deeper, so it becomes a little harder to find them. And if you're not using the electronics, it gets very, very difficult to pinpoint exactly where they're at, especially whenever they're not on the surface feeding like that. But there is still a time and place where you can catch them by paying attention to the surface activity, but it can be a short window of opportunity for you if you're heading out. I would suggest fishing anything like these points in these different channel swings that come up next to these flats out here. Anywhere that you're finding lots of shad, anywhere that you're finding lots of different kinds of marks over those channels, over those flat areas, where especially where there's not very much cover around, you're more likely to find white bass away from the cover and structure, I think, than you are to find them in it, especially as they're chasing those bait fish in the post-spawn phase and going into the early summer. Thanks for watching. I hope this video was able to help you learn something that helps you catch more white bass on Stockton Lake this spring. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you have not yet, so you'll catch the next one. Tight lines, and we'll catch you next time.